Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from ejsllc.com. In this video, I'm going to go through the steps that I follow to prepare a Windows Server VM for use in a KVM lab environment. And so the goal is to end up with a VM that you can easily replicate to make several more if you needed to test a particular aspect of Windows Server, or you're wanting to test an application that needs to run on Windows Server. You would follow these steps to make kind of your template VM, so to speak, that you can use for the multiple deployments. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, as well as want to invite everyone, if you enjoy the video, make sure you click like and don't hesitate to share it with others that might find it useful. And lastly, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you click that subscribe button or follow button on whichever platform you're watching the video. And if you can, click that notification bell so you can know when new videos have been created for you. So diving in here, I have my virtual machine manager, which is connected to another server. That's actually my KVM host. And you see I have several VMs here. Some are lab related, some are like home production related. And to make a new VM, this is fairly straightforward, but we'll just click new virtual machine. The connection we'll choose, I'm choosing my external connection to KVM. I'll be installing this using an ISO. So we'll click forward there. And then I'm going to choose my ISO. Now I have three different volumes set up, the default volume, and then one for ISOs and one for the virtual disk files that I'm using for my VMs. You might not have this. If you have just a default installation of KVM, you'll probably just have default here, and that's perfectly fine. This doesn't have to be set up exactly as I have it set up, but I wanted to make an actual location for ISOs and for VMs that's not within the libvirt file path. But anyway, you want to choose your ISO. So I'll come down here and I have one that's named Windows Server 2019. Feel free to put in the comments if you would like me to make a video about how to get a Windows Server 2019 ISO. You're able to download trials that are valid, I believe, for 120 or 180 days. I want to think it's 120 off the top of my head. But we will pick the ISO. I'll choose volume. And we're not going to use OS generic. Just click that, but we're going to change this here. Windows, this is Server 2019. We'll click forward. And for this, the kind of a base that I tend to give a lot of my VMs is 2 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs. Of course, this can be changed, but again, for this particular VM, we're just kind of making the template for others. I do want to make a mention about the word template. So in the VMware world, a template is an actual thing. It's not a true VM. Rather, it's just the specs of a VM. And I'm pretty sure in the SCVMM world for Hyper-V that this is true as well as far as making VM templates. I'm using the word template simply because that's how this is functioning, but this actually will be a full VM. So it's not a template as far as it's not taking any resources until you deploy it. This will actually be eating a little bit of disk space and such. Of course, it won't be eating any RAM or CPU until it's actually running, but I wanted to make that distinction for you as far as my use of the word template versus using template in some other virtualization environments. So I'll click forward here, and I want to enable the storage for this virtual machine. You can keep this at default if you want. However, since I'm using a little bit different path for where I keep my disks for my virtual machine, I'm going to click select and manage. I'm going to make one. I tend to try to name these disks after the actual name of the virtual machine. It just makes life a little bit easier for me. So we're going to call this demo win server template. And I'm only going to give it 30 gigabytes. There's a reason for that, which actually that's more than storage than what I need. But for this demonstration, 30 will work just fine for me. And I'll click finish. And then we choose the volume that was made. And we'll click forward. And again, I tried to make that volume name match. So let me copy this here. Doesn't have to match, but just makes life a little bit easier for me. Now, I'm going to click Customize Configuration Before Install, and there's a reason for that. And also, I'm going to pick a particular virtual network that I have set up for this Windows lab. Now, for this, I'm changing my mind. I'm going to stick with the default NAT because we're going to want to do patches and such, and just the default network is going to allow this to be able to have access to the internet. The key though is you want to check this customize configuration before install. Then we'll click finish. And that will bring up the configuration. And what I like to do here is set a couple of things, in particular the disk and the NIC to be using the VirtIO version of this. And the reason being, it'll probably give you a bit better performance than the E1000 device NIC and just good old SATA. So I'll choose VirtIO, and it's going to complain that I'm making changes. Do VirtIO again. That should be everything that I want to do here. The CD-ROM should already be populated. We can keep that at SATA. That's perfectly fine. And then we will click Begin Installation. It'll make our virtual machine. It'll allocate the disk, and we have our VM. Now, some of the parts of the installation I'm probably either going to speed up or skip through because you don't necessarily need to, watch scroll bars go by. So this should look familiar to you. This is Windows Server 2019. We'll next through the installation because again, I'm just doing a minimum template-like install. All right, and it's going to ask us which version that we want to use. I typically use standard, but again, this is a demo, so it's not something that's going into production. If there's something that you're wanting to use the data center version features for, in particular, there's some stuff with storage that I know is in data center that's not available in standard, by all means, pick that. Also, for my template, I typically will do without the desktop experience, just it makes it a little bit lighter, and also encourages use of PowerShell and such for management. For your lab, you might want to make a template of each, one with the desktop experience and one with just the standard non-GUI experience, just to where you have both available for you. All right, and we'll click Next. We'll accept the license terms. And I do the custom install, and we see a problem. We don't see any drives. And the reason being is the ISO that comes with Windows is not going to recognize a VirtIO drive. So we have to load the drivers for that. What we're going to need are the VirtIO tools that you can get from Fedora, if I recall off the top of my head. And I'll put a link in the video description about where to be able to download this particular ISO. What we're going to want to do is before we click Load Driver, we're actually going to go back to the virtual machine details within View. And I'm going to change out the ISO that is being used for the CD-ROM. I'm going to change this to my VirtIO Win ISO. We'll apply that. Go back to the console. Then we'll click Load Driver. We'll browse, and we're going to browse to our CD. And what we're going to want in this are the VIO store files. 2019 AMD 64. We'll click OK. And it finds the Red Hat VirtIO SCSI controller, which is what we want to allow Windows to be able to see the drive. And now it recognizes the drive, but of course it says Windows can't be installed because the ISO that's there is not a Windows installer. You can also just, in that initial part where we're changing some of the hardware, just give yourself a second CD drive. I've done that sometimes. But what we'll do is go back to our details, and we'll change the ISO back to the Windows Server 2019 ISO. Apply that. I'm going to click refresh, and that will allow the installer to realize there's a different ISO file there and allow the installation to continue. And so from here, we're just doing the standard waiting for a Windows Server install. So after the install process, it reboots, and we're back here wanting to, or needing to change the administrator password. And again, we're doing the non-GUI install. Feed this an administrator password. And of course, I fat finger my password. It tells us it's been changed. And then we get to the command prompt. It says no network adapters found. All right, and we'll deal with that in just a moment. One thing that I often will do is go and set date and time, and all I do is just change the time zone to my current time zone. By default, this is set to Pacific time. So we'll change it to Eastern Time. And it complained about the NICs, and that's because we're using the VirtIO NICs and there's no driver for it. So we have a couple of things we can do. If I were to go into our CD drive, so if I were to go to D, because we're at the command prompt, we can go into PowerShell now if we wanted to. At the command prompt, we have our disk here. We're going to put back in the VirtIO disk. Choose volume, apply that. And if we were to do dir again, we see the VirtIO stuff. Now, you can install the drivers individually. What I will usually do with my template for this is just install them all, just to where if I wanted to play around with other hardware, I'll have the drivers available. If you're doing this in a production environment, you might want to just pick and choose the drivers to install. But we'll run the x64.msi version of this. And even though this is a Google server, we still have a graphical installer. So we'll click through, accept the license term. We're going to grab all of the drivers, click next, and install it. And I will typically, especially for my lab, just always trust software from Red Hat Inc. In your production environment, you may or may not want to do that. We'll install the balloon driver is what allows some memory management stuff to happen. But this is going to grab all of the drivers, display driver, even though we technically don't need it on this server, as well as the NIC driver. So we'll click finish. And now we'll go back to sconfig. And it should be able to find a NIC this time. So we'll press 8 for network settings. And it has found a NIC, and notice that it has an IP address from DHCP. So at this point, since I want a template that's really kind of just a minimal install, I don't do any other configuration to it. I don't allow ping to happen. I don't configure RDP or anything like that, because I'm simply wanting the base installation that I will clone and then change into whatever it is that I need for my lab. But the thing that I do make sure I do is updates, because I do want to have my template machine as up to date as possible, just to where, when you're deploying this, you don't have to waste time downloading the updates for Windows Server. So we'll choose option A. And it gives us the option to pick updates. Again, I'm doing everything because I want this to be a fully patched system before I prepare it to be a clone. One thing to note, this will take a while, unlike on a Linux system, which tends to update from a fresh install pretty quick. My experience with Windows Server is that this takes a decent bit of time. I know I don't have a whole lot of RAM and CPU put into this, but just know that you'll be waiting a bit when you're doing a fresh install. And after a long while, we'll be presented for the option to reboot, which of course we'll say yes. You might see a black screen for a couple of minutes, and then it will complete the reboot process. And we're back up. So we'll do the send key, Control-Alt-Delete. And we're back to our command prompt. So there are a couple more things that we want to do. One is actually go back to the VirtIO. And what we want to do is install the guest agent. So I'll go into the guest agent directory. We'll run the x64 MSI. We'll then go back into sconfig. And I like to run Windows Update one more time just to make sure that we've got everything. So all updates again, and then we wait for it to search. And once again, we are asked if we want to do all of the updates. For this, I actually had to press enter just in the console to make this appear after a while, but it shouldn't take too terribly long for you. So we'll choose A for all updates, and it'll download and install them. And this set of updates does not require a restart. However, just experience with Windows Server tells me it's generally a good idea to go ahead and restart. And this time the restart takes significantly less amount of time. Do Control-Alt-Delete, log in, and then usually we'll do Windows updates a third time, because as we saw just a moment ago, does not always catch all of the updates with the first round. And this time there truly are no more updates. So we'll press continue, And now the last thing that we need to do is actually run the sysprep command on the machine. What this is going to do is basically get rid of unique identifiers and such on the machine to where it can truly be cloned and not potentially cause problems with Active Directory and such. So we'll exit to the command line. I actually go into the sysprep directory. Let me clear the screen here. So we'll go to C Windows System 32 sysprep. We'll run the sysprep command with generalize. We want the out-of-box experience because with our clones, we want that to be as if a brand new system was made. We're going to shut down the VM, and then we'll do mode VM as well. And this will take just a couple of minutes to run. All right, we see guest is not running. Go back and we see our demo when server template is here. One thing that I will usually do afterward is make sure that there is nothing in the CD-ROM drive, which of course there is because we had the virt.io stuff. And we have our template ready to go. So if we want to deploy a Windows server, we would simply go through the cloning process of our template and we will have a fresh install. And if you went through this, you'll notice that it takes a non-trivial amount of time to take a fresh installation of Windows Server from install to being patched fully. And so being able to do these little templates and make clones of them saves a significant amount of time if you're just wanting to spin up stuff real quick in your lab to test a one-off thing. I hope that you found this video useful for you. If you did, make sure that you click like and also share with others that might benefit from it as well. If you have not subscribed yet to the channel, make sure you do click that subscribe button or follow button depending on the platform on which you're watching it. And if you have the option, make sure you ring that bell for notifications. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.